Hello and welcome to lesson 2 of week 2. My name is Mildred. In this lesson we are going to look at the number data types, and then we're going to look at the Boolean, and we'll see how we can cast from one data type to another. Now when we look at data types last week, we saw that we had int, we had floats, and then we had complex as the data types that are number or numeric types. When we have an integer, it is a whole number. When we have a float, it's a decimal number. And when we have complex, it's a number that has a real part and an imaginary part. And we say we are not going to go into details about the complex data type since we will not need it in this course. But if you do physics in school and you're dealing with signal processing, or an engineer dealing with electrical engineering, and you want to automate stuff, complex data type will come in useful. We are going to look deeply at this usage when we are in an advanced course. But in this course, we'll focus on the int and the float. So when we want to get the type of a value or a variable, we use the type function, right? So let's say x is equal to 5, y is equal to 3.4, and we'll have z is equal to 1j. And when we have this and we want to print the type of each, so let's say print type, we want to print the type of x, we want to print the type of y, and we want to print the type of z. When we run this, we have the different data types, int, float, and complex for each of them. Now when we have this, and let's say we have something like a is equal to, and it's quoted, and we have a string 4. Now this is a string, and you cannot add x plus a. You have to convert from a string to an integer. If it is 4.2, you want to convert to a float, right? Now we can do this with something we call casting. How do we cast? So let's say we want to cast x to become a float, right? We don't say x is equal to, we use the float function and we'll put float x like this. Alright, so now x becomes, instead of 5, will become 5.0. And when we look at the type of x now, we're going to get, I'll comment this out, and we'll run to get the type of x only. And the type of x now, instead of an int, will become a float. Okay, now a is a string, we want a to be an integer. So say, for instance, a is equal to, we use the int function to cast a to an integer from a string. And so when we put type of a, instead of being a string now, it's going to be an int. Same thing with y. Y is a float, and we want to cast y to become an integer. So it's just going to give you the integer part of this. So when we say y is equal to int y, so instead of 3.4, we're going to have 3, because it casts and gives you, I'm doing type of y, so it's going to give us the integer of the integer part. And if we want to print just y, let's print just y to see the value it becomes. When you print just y, it's going to give you 3, because it takes just the integer part to make it an int. Even if it were like 3.8, it doesn't round up or round down. It just cuts and gives you the integer part of that operation. So you get 3. So this is how we cast. We have different functions for casting. We have the int, we have the float, and then we have another function called the string to cast to a string. So let's say y is 3.8, but we want it to be a string. It will give us 3.8, but it is going to just quote the 3.8 when we use it. So for instance, I'm going to run this and you'll see. So we change y to 3.8, we try to cast y to a string. Y is still going to be 3.8, but it's going to be of data type string. So when you want to cast from a string like a to integer or float, that value that is quoted has to be an integer or a float. Right? It has to be a numeric type, either integer or float, for it to be casted to whatever you want to cast it to, either int or float. Alright, so we also have something we call Boolean. We saw in the last lesson that when you have compared two things, you get either yes or no, and in Python it is called true or false. Anything you evaluate using the bool function, we have a function called bool within bool. If I say bool a is going to return true, so type of a will be a Boolean print a. Let's just focus on the print. statement. So let's say bool A is going to return, I'll just print bool A so you can see properly what I'm trying to achieve. So when I say print bool A is going to evaluate to true. When I say print bool Z is still going to evaluate to true. Anything you put, well, as long as there's a value, is going to be true. But let's say A is an empty string, it has nothing, and bool A now is going to become false because it is empty. So the only time you get a false when you use the bool function is when you put none. You are checking the bool of none. The none type is going to return false. You are checking the bool of an empty string, or you're checking the bool of the number 0. All you get is a false. Every other thing will evaluate to true. So this is where we end this week's lesson. Thank you and see you next week.